macabre, gruesome and horrifying, ghastly, of pertaining to, dealing with, or representing death, especially its grimmer or uglier aspect, of or suggestive of the allegorical dance of death. Prepare yourself for these macabre moments.
This is Marie Samuels, and he is Eric Altman, and welcome to the August episode of Macabre Moments. We're just going to get right into it, right, Eric?
Yeah, I'll jump right in because we have a great guest joining us this month.
Yes, our guest tonight works as a full-time author, lecturer, and journalist. He writes about a wide range of unsolved mysteries, alien encounters, government conspiracies, Bigfoot, paranormal. He has been seen on shows such as History Channel's Monster Quest and UFO Hunters, VH1's Legend Hunters, National Geographic's The Truth About UFOs and Paranormal, and Paranatural, and the BBC's Out of This World, MSNBC's Countdown, and Sci-Fi Channel's Proof Positive. This man has published over 50 books on all topics of the paranormal. We would like to welcome the amazing Nick Redfern to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nick.
Well, thanks, Marie. Thanks, Eric, for having me on again, and I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So,
thank you.
You just had a new book that just came out August 4th, Lake Monsters of the Deep. Did I get the title right?
Almost. Monsters of the Deep.
So it's not just lake monsters.
Oh, no, it's sort of sea serpents and giant squid and giant octopus and things like the Kraken and mermaids. Anything that's weird and that's in the water.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the Kraken. I was going to bring this up later in the interview, but since you mentioned it, I don't know if you're aware or not, but here in Seattle, we got a NHL team, and they have announced the name of the team, and the name is the Seattle Kraken.
Oh, cool.
And I don't know that much about the Kraken, so I was wondering if you could enlighten me a little bit about what the Kraken is.
Well, yeah, to a degree, it depends on whose view of the legend you sort of go with. And, all around the world, there are reports of strange creatures in the oceans, in the lakes, and so on. But the Kraken from Scandinavia is probably one of the most well-known one. Everybody's heard of it, but a lot of people probably haven't heard the legends. And basically, it was this sort of gigantic creature, large kind of bulbous body with these tentacles coming off of it. And if you read some of the early reports, sort of 16th, 17th century, you'll see stories of a creature that's anywhere from like 50 feet to a couple of 100 feet in length, and bringing ships down and killing and drowning sailors in dozens and dozens. But if you look at the stories a little bit more critically, it seems to be that a lot of the legends are simply that. They're legends. However, that doesn't mean that there wasn't a creature that led to for the inspiration of the Kraken. If you look at the ancient artwork, it almost sort of fits the scenario of a giant squid. Now, giant squid are very rare. You don't see them very often. And there are stories going back to the 1800s and early 1900s and earlier than that of people seeing sailors out on the oceans, seeing giant squids round about about 100, 120 feet long. That includes the body and the massive tentacles as well. And so I think there's a good case can be made that, yes, there was a Kraken, but it was based upon sightings of enormous squid, and it still, it demonstrates that these creatures are real and gigantic, but sometimes with the, and mythology comes into the story as well, then we have to sort of look at it carefully and critically. And as I said, I think that's probably the most likely candidate would be a giant squid for what created the folklore of the Kraken.
Yeah, I agree with that. Do you know what the last reported sighting of the Kraken was? Like, roughly what time period?
Well, there have been sightings of giant squid in Scandinavia, which is like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, etc., etc. And there have been reports in the 1800s, 1900s, and into the early part of the 20th century as well. So, the chances are they probably are still around because, as I said earlier, they're very rarely seen, giant squid. They typically spend a lot of time in the very deep parts of the waters. So, the chances of seeing one are almost nil, unless you happen to be in the right place at the right time, which, is probably not going to happen. But as I said, there have been reports less than a century ago, but most of the more significant reports were round about the 1600s and 1700s. Now, that may have been because there could have been a lot more of them then, and perhaps the numbers that are still around today may be declining, and so that would explain, the big, vast difference between what was going on 400 years ago versus what's being seen today.
That makes perfect sense. With climate warming and us, putting toxins into the ocean that could easily kill off any or reduce, the amount of the living creatures that are in the ocean.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of it does come down to environment and pollution, and just the fact that there's so many more people on the planet that have to be fed. So there's more and more fishermen out there. So everything kind of has like a spiraling aspect when it comes to animals. We see today how many are dying off. And it's not really because of the planet. It's because of us. Whether it's people killing elephants, for their tusks or whatever. It really is down to the human race, really.
Right. Now, obviously, I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask about the Loch Ness Monster. What do we know about the Loch Ness Monster?
Well, I mean, without doubt, I think, next to Bigfoot, I would say the Loch Ness Monster is probably the next most well-known one. Everybody's heard of Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster. Most people have heard of, like, the Yeti and the Chupacabra. But then you go sort of further down the lane and, unless you're actually involved and interested in cryptozoology, most people probably wouldn't know, many of the other ones. But, yeah, the Loch Ness Monster, next to Bigfoot, I would say, is sort of the most well-known monster, or monsters. I mean, when people say or talk about the Loch Ness Monster, it makes it sound like there's just one of them. And, because there have been sightings actually since the 6th century, that's when the first report was actually chronicled, for like a colony, if you like, of animals to be living in Loch Ness for that long, then, there would have to be, at the very least, at any given time, probably 15, 16, 17, 18, to allow for like a strong non-inbred colony. So in that sense, there would have to be a lot of them. But there's a lot of controversy surrounding the Loch Ness monsters because the most popular theory is that they are surviving relics of plesiosaurs. Now, plesiosaurs weren't dinosaurs, but they were around at the same time as the dinosaurs, and they were actually marine reptiles in the same way that like a crocodile is a reptile. Now, also like a crocodile, a plesiosaur being a marine reptile means, like a crocodile, it has to come up and surface for air about every 30 minutes. Crocodile, can easily be under the water for about 30 minutes. And so if we were to say the Loch Ness monsters could stay underwater for about 30 minutes, and there's a colony of them, let's say 16 at any given time, that means every one of those 16 would be surfacing every 30 minutes of every day, of every week, or every month of every year. Now you imagine that, 16 of these animals surfacing for about 5 minutes probably, every half an hour of every day, week, etc. We should be seeing them more. If they're reptiles, we should be seeing them more than we do. There's only usually about 7 or 8, 9 good cases per year. And so the chances of them being reptiles, is that like a plesiosaur, is actually quite slim, even though people describe them as looking not unlike plesiosaurs. And the other angle as well is that plesiosaurs lived in the oceans, which are saltwater, and Loch Ness is freshwater. Now, there are some animals that could adapt. I mean, you have the freshwater and saltwater crocodile, but there's no evidence in the fossil record that plesiosaurs have been found, or their remains, in freshwater environments. And on top of that, you've got the other theory as well, that they could be something supernatural rather than sort of physical creatures. For example, the famous occultist Aleister Crowley had a house at Loch Ness called Boleskine House, and he performed all sorts of rituals and rites to try and summon up demonic entities from the loch. And it wasn't long after that that the sort of proliferation of sightings of the Nesses started to appear, and there have been a lot of weird other things like Men in Black sightings at Loch Ness and UFOs seen over the loch. So you have the sort of more down-to-earth theories, like, for example, some sort of reptile or something like a plesiosaur, and then you've got the weirder side of it, if you like. But there's no doubt there's something in there. As I said, even though we don't have too many reports, round about 9 or 10 a year would suggest that whatever they are, they spend most of their time under the water, which suggests probably some kind of fish. But that gets a bit complicated as well, because there have been a lot of reports on land of the creatures basking on land. And in these very, very rare cases, when they come onto land, people said they walk in a really awkward way, kind of like a seal. They can sort of really scoot through the water, but on the land, they're sort of really difficult for them. And that's what the Nesses are like on land. And so, when you look at all the evidence, there's clearly something, but because Loch Ness is like 700 feet deep, 23 miles long, and about a mile wide, unless somebody has the funding to, take mini submarines under the water, the chances of actually finding one are really difficult,
I am familiar with the theory that Aleister Crowley may have summoned the Loch Ness Monster when he was doing all of his rituals at the Boleskine House. Are you aware that they're actually refurbishing that? The Boleskine House?
Yeah, it actually got burned twice, and we don't know who did that and what the purpose was. Whether it was just vandals or if it was somebody, had a reason they wanted to destroy it. But there's a lot of weird stuff with the house itself, not only with Aleister Crowley performing all these rituals and rites, but two owners of the house actually killed themselves. And that is sort of, really kind of strange as well. obviously not Crowley. I mean, he didn't die till 1947.
Right.
But one of them was a military officer, and he committed suicide. He just came home and shot himself in the head, and nobody knew why he did it. And another one was an English actor
The
named
military
George.
guy, didn't he do it at the dinner table in front of his family?
No, it wasn't actually in front of his. There are some. There's some changes on the story. It's sort of become like the stories gets more sort of elaborated. But no, he actually went up into the bedroom and just put the shotgun in his face and essentially blew his head off. But no, he didn't actually do it in front of his family. But what he did do, as I said, he shot his head off with a shotgun, and then the next thing, his maid saw the dog came running down the stairs and out to the front door, wagging its tail furiously, and it had a piece of the major's skull in his mouth. He thought he was, they were playing a game or something, and so a bit of a grisly story. And the other man who killed himself, who owned the house for a while, was an English actor named George Sanders, and so it's really weird. That it's not just around Crowley and Led Zeppelin's guitarist, Jimmy Page.
Yeah.
Well, he owned the house for a number of years, and he said when he lived there, you could just, feel the vibes, and it just wasn't sort of a good vibe. So, again, everything about Loch Ness, never mind just the monster or the monsters, but the location and then the history is all kind of weird as well.
Getting back to, sorry, Marie, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, Nick, getting back to Loch Ness, this past year they released information from an environmental DNA study they did on the loch, and they found over 3,000 species in the loch itself, and none, of course, being a large reptile or anything that would fit the description of Nessie, but they threw out a possible theory that perhaps Nessie is a very large or giant eel. What do you make of that possible theory?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting theory. And, when you said, Eric, about that project, the DNA project, that was a really good idea, because they were literally able to, analyze all the DNA that they were able to get. And, they found regular fish and they found eel as well. Now, in terms of the idea that the Loch Ness monsters could be giant eels, the only downside with this project is that when you take DNA, yes, it can prove it's a salmon or an eel, but what DNA analysis cannot do is to tell you how big the creature is from which the DNA has been taken. So, in other words, if there was a 30-foot long eel in Loch Ness and there was a 2-foot long eel in Loch Ness, the DNA would be exactly the same.
Right.
A lot of people, that didn't come out too much in a lot of the media coverage. They kind of sensationalized it a little bit. But one of the theories being, the idea of giant eels is a good one in a number of reasons. One of them being that eels can actually briefly leave the water, and they kind of sort of wriggle like a snake. And as I said, there have been a number of reports of the creatures on land. Actually, a friend of mine, Roland Watson, wrote a really good book a couple of years ago all about the land encounters, and that's a really good book. So, in that sense, they could be giant eels. And although, they don't have a tail as such, they're just like a long body, that they do superficially look slightly like, sort of like something from the Jurassic era. The problem is, though, because an eel is just like one long body, it's not like, with a flexible head and neck. The problem is, eels cannot sort of rise their neck and head out of the water while the body stays horizontal. And that's what a lot of the witnesses describe. They see like a humped back, sometimes a tail, and then this vertical head. That's the one downside with eels, is that they cannot rise their heads and necks vertically. They actually don't have a neck as we think of it. It's like they just sort of swim along in the same way that a snake would in the water. Unless, of course, and this has been theorized, that maybe they are eels which over the centuries or thousands of years have adapted, and that their actual structure may have altered to allow them briefly to rise their heads out. So it's interesting because there's so many theories and there's a lot of good data for each of the theories, but then something pops up every time which kind of sort of puts a bit of doubt on this one, and then put it onto another one, and then you think, wow, this sounds really good, but then there's like a but comes along, and so, or it could be, for me, if they're not paranormal, which I actually think they could be. I actually wrote a book called Nessie, all about the supernatural aspect of it. But if they are flesh and blood animals, I think the most likely scenario is they actually could be something we've never ever found before. It may not be an eel or some sort of giant marine reptile. It may just be something science has never found, which might make more sense because it would explain the sort of the loopholes and everything else in a lot of these other stories.
Do you think we'll ever have answers as to if the Loch Ness Monster is a thing?
Well, that's a good question because, I mean, as I said, the number of land reports we get are somewhere, I think, in Roland Watson's book, I think there's like 40 or 50 reports going back about 150 years, maybe something like that. But it's a lot of reports. However, if let's say one of those got stranded on the land, I think that's one possible way that we could actually find a living one or a dead one. Possibly if it had got to the shore and it was dying, it could get washed up onto the sand and the stones and get caught there. That is a good way we could probably get it. And also if it was just foraging around the woods, because people have described seeing these things lumbering around in the woods, and sometimes the theory is that they're looking for food, sort of small animals, that kind of thing, and then they go back to the water. So that's one big possibility. The other is that over the years, people have said they've seen them just by the shore, but actually near the roads. Now, in a worst-case scenario, because I would hate for us to get the evidence this way, but, if one got hit by a car or a truck and they got killed, then, it'd be a terrible way to prove they exist. I'd rather we could sort of get DNA, photographs, film, perhaps sedate it briefly, and then let them go. But as I said, the big problem is that most cryptozoologists, we're in a position where unless we kind of win the lottery, there's no way, we can kind of spend 6 months, up and down in Loch Ness in a submarine, almost indefinitely. The funding is just not there. And unfortunately, much of the the regular scientific community just doesn't want to tie itself to the Loch Ness Monster because they worry about, being seen as the biologist who chases monsters, so they avoid it. So, that's one of the big issues is funding and having people who have the ability, to be there for about several months at a time. And interestingly enough, of all the researchers who've looked into this, the ones who've had the most success are those who really have sort of spent, 2-3 months of their lives, away from family and just, sort of scouring around the whole loch for 2, 3, 4 months. And it seems that's just what you have to do. They're so rare that you've really got to be on site all the time.
Kind of like Bigfoot, right, Eric?
Yeah, a lot like it.
Yeah. Now, when you were doing research for this book, did you come across any creature that you were not aware of, that you learned of while you were doing research?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one of the interesting ones were sort of inland cases. Now, everybody's heard of lake monsters and sea serpents and that kind of thing. But what I found was like a proliferation of reports of inland strange creatures. I won't sort of focus totally on the UK, obviously, but there have been reports in the UK going back about 15 or 20 years of really large eels being seen, round about 15 to 20 feet long. And they weren't seen. Nothing like that was seen prior to about the early to late 1980s. And it's been suggested that maybe pollution could be something to do with this. Pollutants in the water. Mm-hmm. And the idea that we're sort of creating our own monsters within our own landscapes. One of the other things I talk about in the book is a place called Lake Granbury in Texas, not too far from where I live, and that has had a sighting, or a lot of sightings, I should say, within the lake itself, and it's known as Old One Eye. I don't know why, because there's no real story beyond it, a bit of legend about its eye being poked out. But there does seem to be some reality to the particular story. And the people who've seen it, they too have said they've seen what they thought was a giant eel. Now, some pollutants actually can affect the DNA of animals. And so if it got into the water supply, particularly things like lakes, particularly, if some unscrupulous factory owner dumped all the waste into the lakes and so on, then you could see how, in a really weird way, we could be creating sort of inland monsters. But they're monsters in the sense that they're just growing really big. And so I think, when I started to look into this side of the book, or the subject, I should say, it's really started to hit me that we're actually seeing, it's a lot of animals, they're disappearing. What we're seeing with these inland monsters that seem to be like giant eels and similar things, like giant frogs as well. What I've found is we're actually seeing a growing number of these. And again, that makes me think we could be looking at sort of like pollutants. For example, you can find stories, actually in U.S. government reports, where in Minnesota, just a few years ago, there was a lot of pollutants in lakes and pools and rivers in the state, and they were growing like extra limbs on the body or an extra eye. But whereas, you might think it would handicap them, they actually were learning how to use them, and again, but that was through pollutants, and it was causing, these sort of strange, well, they were frogs, but they just didn't look like normal frogs. And as I said, it was actually the subject in the 90s of a full government study. So it wouldn't surprise me. It sounds like sci-fi, but it wouldn't surprise me if we are now creating our own inlaid monsters.
Right, so the pollution and the chemicals and such are mutating the existing creatures to make them seem more monstrous.
Yeah, and just as a little aside, a good friend of mine, and Eric's as well, Ken Gerhard, Ken's done a lot of research into the so-called Texas Chupacabra, which are actually hairless coyotes, but they've actually got a number of really weird sort of mutations. They have these weird pouches on the back of the legs. Their top jaw is much longer than it should be. They have this sort of almost like a hunched back, and they actually come out and hunt in the day, and which is normal coyotes don't do that. And Ken has found that in areas in Texas where there are a lot of groups of the so-called Texas Chupacabra, there's also a number of coal burning factories. And these particular factories give off carbon sulfide. And what this actually does is to create like a mutation again. So I wouldn't be surprised, given the fact that Ken has made direct connections between where all these groups are versus where the factories are. It wouldn't surprise me if, these coyotes are now developing in a very weird way that takes them far away from regular coyotes.
It's very interesting. Very interesting. Eric, do you have any questions about creatures from the deep?
Well, it's a fascinating subject because we really haven't done much exploration in the ocean or oceans, and there's so much there that we don't know about. So it's very possible that these creatures that they wrote about in ancient times, the 15th, 16th, 17th century, may actually exist. And I know, Nick, you mentioned that a lot of it may be based on legends, and there probably are, but the discovery of the giant squid, 15, 20 years ago, just proves that there's a lot of things in the ocean that we don't know about. The trench, the Mariana Trench down in the Pacific Ocean, are you aware if that has been explored to any extent, and if the possibility that there may be creatures we have yet to discover in that trench? Have you heard anything about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are reports of small animals, just really strange-looking crabs and things like that. And but we haven't found, sort of the smoking gun, like something really huge. But there have been some sort of theoretical situations where people believe that Megalodon, which is this sort of giant prehistoric shark, that they could still exist possibly in those areas because there have been sightings also off the coasts of Australia of gigantic sharks. Now, Megalodon, I'm getting too mixed up. Megalodon is, or was, or may still is, a gigantic shark. You imagine something looking like a great shark, like a great white shark, but actually about 50 to 60, maybe even 70 feet long, which would basically tear in half a great white. That's what Megalodon was. And so some of these larger animals, potentially, when you've got these incredibly deep areas where most people, even regular divers and submarines don't always go down there unless they have to. There could be all sorts of things down there, really. But I mean, a perfect example of, not really knowing what's down there would be the coelacanth. Now, it's a famous example. A lot of people have heard of it, but it is a perfect one because back in 1935, just off the coast of South Africa, a coelacanth was caught, which was actually a fish that went back to prehistoric times. And up until that point, we'd only got fossilized data. That's all there was. And so we assumed, that they died off at the same time as T-Rex, etc. Only to find in 1935 that there was colonies of them swimming around quite happily off the coast of South Africa. Now, it's important to note, we're not talking about something like a little fish about 2 inches long. They grow to about 6, 7, 8 feet long. So in other words, it's not like they were little fish, as I said, hiding out in the middle of nowhere. They were 8, 9 feet long just off the coast of South Africa. So it does demonstrate that creatures, like you said with a giant squid, Eric, not having been found too long ago, and the coelacanths, if you like, being resurrected almost, it makes you realize that there could be a lot of things still there. I mean, another example is the oarfish. An oarfish looks just like a sea serpent, and they grow to about 20, 25, 30 feet long. If you Google a photo of an oarfish, OARFISH, you'll see them. They just look like something straight out of a horror movie. And most people never see them, but occasionally, people do.
Yeah, they're very hideous-looking fish. And I will say this. I will say this about the megalodon. If the megalodon does still exist, we're definitely going to need a bigger boat.
Exactly. Or several of them. At least several of them.
Aircraft carrier. We might survive with an aircraft carrier.
Yeah, I actually don't think it would be you would stand any chance of sort of reeling in a megalodon.
No. I think it's best just to let them be.
Have either of you watched the movie The Meg?
I have, yes.
Yeah.
That's probably not too far. I mean, it's obviously, it's made for, sensationalizing, but I mean, I don't think it would be too far off the mark.
So you also have another book coming out this October, and it's called The Martians.
Yeah, it's sort of a study of a lot of the controversy surrounding the planet Mars. And I mean, Mars has sort of an interesting kind of relationship, so to speak, with the Earth, in the sense that apart from the moon, our moon, which is just a moon, Mars is the actual nearest planet to us. And of course, within ancient Rome, ancient Greece, the people of Egypt, thousands of years ago, they had sort of like a very close affinity to Mars, in the sense that they had deities, gods, to the planets, and Mars was one of the the most prominent ones. And so there's always been this kind of connection, and of course, I mean, over the last few decades and still going on today, there's a lot of studies of Mars itself, and of course the sheer distance, which is tens of millions of miles away. I mean, to give you an idea, the distance from the Earth to the Moon is about 1/4 of a million miles, but we're talking about tens of millions of miles to get to Mars, and then tens and tens of millions of miles to get back again. And so the big problem is to get there. We've got probes, but you keep seeing stories about making manned missions to Mars, but I still think it's going to take a long, long time. So what that means is we've got a lot of photographs, and we've got the devices just quite literally, sort of going across the landscape, almost like some sort of futuristic lawnmower, taking pictures all over the place. And in some of these pictures, there's a lot of, weird imageries that look like pyramids, and there's one very bizarre picture that seems to show something looking like a crab going up or a crab-like creature, I should say, going up the side of one of these rocks, and very odd-looking thing.
Is it actually moving in the footage?
No, it's a still photograph. It's that one of the probes took. If you Google Mars and facehugger, from the facehuggers from the Alien movie.
Oh yeah.
But if you Google Planet Mars photo and facehugger, and you'll see the picture, and it looks like this, almost like an egg-shaped thing with all these legs coming across it, coming out of it. And that's a genuine, real NASA picture. NASA says, it's just the light and rocks looking strange. But if you look at that picture, it really doesn't look like that. It looks like some kind of weird crustacean or something like that. And so you've got things like that. You've got the pyramids on Mars, these odd structures. And so I decided, or approached one of the publishers I'm with, and said, why don't we do kind of like a definitive book on, or hopefully definitive book on all the mysteries of Mars. And this, as I said, this would include like the NASA photographs, and some of the pictures going back to the 1970s, which was when the so-called face on Mars was first seen. And one of the other things a lot of people don't know that in the early to mid 1980s, the CIA actually did a secret remote viewing of Mars to see if they could find out what happened on Mars, say 10,000 or 100,000 years ago, using psychics to see if they could figure out if there really was intelligent life on Mars at some point. So there's a lot of weird stuff in relation to Mars, and I guess the most sensational angle is the scenario of there still being some sort of Martian life on the planet, possibly deep underground, maybe even struggling to survive, but actually, successfully doing it to a degree, if you like.
And what is your opinion of life on Mars?
Well, in terms of what we know for sure is that Mars has a huge abundance of water. We've got it in the form of solid ice, water, and vapor as well. Water exists on Mars in all of those three forms. And on top of that, the sheer number of, or the amount of water, I should say, in all those three forms is actually gigantic. People think, it's just a few pools, but it isn't. You've got the ice at the poles, some of the lower levels of Mars where there are caverns and caves and that kind of thing. In one case, not too long ago, they found like an underwater lake. So, in other words, there's the one thing that just about everything that lives needs, and that's water. It doesn't matter if you're a bird, a human, a cat, a dog, anything. We all need water, or we're done. And so it encourages me, the fact that that there is a gigantic amount of water on Mars, and there's also evidence of vegetation, even though NASA denies it. If you Google again, Mars and banyan trees, B-A-N-Y-A-N, you'll see these strange photographs, again taken by NASA, which look like strange trees having been taken by one of the aerial probes as it was approaching in the orbital area, and took pictures of what looked stunningly like trees. So where you've got water, where you've got trees, you've got a strange crab-like type creature. I actually think there could be a significant amount of life on Mars, which, NASA totally deny that. But I think there could be a good case, and possibly, some of this life living deep underground, and that might even include intelligent Martians as well.
Do you know if Mars is considered a Goldilocks zone?
What do you mean in that sense?
The Goldilocks zone, it's the phrase that they use for when an area, and you can even apply it to a planet, has the exact components needed to support life, right?
Oh, so yeah, yeah. Well, that's kind of controversial because, in the one sense, you're right. The Earth itself, the reason why, we live the way we do and how we've civilized, well, to a degree, and and we've developed, and all the other animals, have survived and lived, and you have this perfect chain. Yeah, I mean, you could make a case that you have to have everything just in the right place at the right time to allow for developments, and it goes on and on. And of course, it is a fact that as far as we know, there's no life on, for example, Mercury. That's too close to the sun. It's just stone and rock. We know that as a fact. You look at, for example, Jupiter. Most of Jupiter itself is actually in like a gaseous form. So, there could be life within, Jupiter's gaseous atmosphere, but it would be probably a life totally different to us. But I would say that, that Mars would be the most likely one to achieve significant life because, if you look at the sort of the areas on Mars which have been photographed, and you can see where there's been significant wearing away of the rocks in valleys and things like that, it's clear that at some point Mars really did have a massive amount of water. And if you've got vegetation, you've got these strange creatures photographed even on Mars's own pictures, even though it denies them. You put all that together, and I think at some point Mars was perfectly in the right place, but something happened. Now, people have speculated, could it have been like us, that they could have destroyed themselves in a nuclear war? It could have, eroded the atmosphere and then just spiraled from there, and eventually Mars died. That could happen to us, and, in a couple of centuries, everything could be extinct. So I think Mars is of the ones that potentially we could get to, and where we could still send probes to. I think that Mars is the most likely one where we're going to find some real surprises.
Well, I mean, I think we already have, right? With what you just said, with the crab and the trees and the ice.
Well, yeah, you're right. The problem is that NASA denies that. They deny the crab-like creature is anything other than a rock. But as I said, it really doesn't look like that. The banyan trees look like what you would expect an alien extraterrestrial tree to look like. It looks like a tree, but it doesn't look anything like our trees, but they still look like trees. So that's the problem, is that NASA just doesn't really want to deal with the sort of anomalies on Mars. Now, people have asked me, do you think there's a cover-up? It's hard to say. Some people think there is a conspiracy to hide the truth. Other researchers think, well, maybe NASA is just, trying to take a scientific approach, and they don't want to say too much until they can prove something one way or another. And we have to admit that the only reason we have these photographs is because NASA has let us have them. So in that sense, it's not like NASA is hiding these pictures of these banyan trees. It's not like they were declassified by mistake. NASA was quite happy to reveal them, and they're all on the internet. You can actually see all these pictures on NASA's various websites. So NASA isn't hiding these pictures, these crab-like creatures and the trees. They're just saying, well, it looks just like a weird anomaly, like seeing a face in a cloud. That's what basically what NASA thinks. They think it's sort of
pareidolia.
Pareidolia. Yeah, you've just seen too much of clouds and faces and fingers in the clouds. And I'm sure that does happen now and again. I'm sure you could find any shadowy part on Mars and look at the pictures and see something that looks sort of, like a picture of Mickey Mouse or something. But when you actually see some that really do look like structures, albeit sort of damaged, highly damaged and eroded, which suggests that if there was a civilization, it could have been hundreds of thousands of years ago. When you put all those together, I think we are actually seeing something beyond that. I think we are beyond just seeing faces in clouds. So, but as I said, the important thing that a lot of the really conspiracy people sometimes avoid, and they shouldn't avoid, is the fact that NASA are the people who are giving us those pictures. We haven't had to fight for them. So that's, that's actually a good thing.
Well, and, NASA's giving us these pictures of, what they're saying is just a rock, but it looks like a crab, and, it's just an anomaly, but it looks like a tree. But it makes one wonder, are there photos that they're not sharing with us that are more poignant? Well,
that's true. There could be. There could be more photographs, and there's also the theory, which kind of ties in with this, that maybe there are more photographs, but then it ties in with the idea of disclosure, that slowly and bit by bit we're being acclimatized to the idea that there is life on Mars. And so a few more pictures are put out to the public and the media, and then a few more, and then over the period of 5 or 10 years, we all suddenly are told the truth, but we've already been sort of climatized on the way, So there's that disclosure angle of, maybe the photos are being released to test us, to see how we respond, the general public.
Right.
Are we excited? Are we frightened? Are we paranoid? Is it a bit of everything? So I think that could be part of it as well, just to see how people respond when, they put another picture out of what looks like a weird animal and something else. And that scenario, is actually quite an intriguing one.
Do you know what the oxygen and gravity is like on Mars?
Oh, well, for astronauts on Mars, if you've got a suit, you'd be okay walking around. It's not too much. It's not too bad. But in terms of actually oxygen, it's practically zero for all intents and purposes. You could not walk around on Mars without a suit.
Do you know if there's gravity though on Mars, though, similar to our planet?
Oh yeah. There is gravity on Mars, and you actually wouldn't have a major problem getting around Mars in the same way with the Moon. But the problem is the vast majority of Mars, the atmosphere is carbon dioxide, and we cannot live in that. It's just impossible. But of course, whatever lives on Mars, could live on carbon dioxide. It's like, the balance we have on our Earth. We take in oxygen and we give out carbon dioxide, which is then absorbed by plants. It's actually like a perfect balance. So something like that could easily happen on Mars, but you could not land on Mars in a capsule and walk out. You'd be dead. There's just no way you could do that.
Well, and my understanding is, there's underground, tunnels and caverns, or they believe that there's and maybe there's oxygen pockets under there, and that's why the Martians, or whatever we'd like to call them, that could potentially live there are underground, is because that's where the remaining oxygen is.
Well, yeah, that actually ties in with another weird anomaly. You could find, again, in the NASA pictures, what eerily looked like long tubes, and they become known as the Martian Tubes. And they kind of look like gigantic straws, the sort of straw you would have with a, sort of glass of soda. They look just like gigantic, excuse me, like a gigantic straw going all across the landscape in certain parts of Mars. And it's been suggested that whether they were still working now or not, they could actually be some kind of gigantic straw-like structures designed to both preserve and move and remove around, the landscape, both water and oxygen. In other words, that perhaps the Martians have managed to survive by somehow, sort of keeping oxygen, keeping water, but not naturally. They would probably have to create, like you said, underground facilities, very kind of delicate and, careful to make sure that, enough oxygen, enough water, enough atmosphere, underground possibly even. But it would take, it'd be an immense job. But, we don't really know how far ahead of us they are. It may not have been a major job, major task to do that. But if you look again at the sort of Martian tubes, you'll see they look just like something being used for transport, and water and oxygen have been suggested as two of the two possibilities.
Very intriguing.
So there's a lot of things to think about, and but what I find mostly intriguing is that you'd expect to find one little anomaly, say on a photograph on Mercury, another one on Venus here and there. But when you find all of these weird anomalies on Mars, then that really kind of makes me sort of sit up and listen. Mm-hmm. I mean, I could understand that there might just be something on Mars that looks like a face, and that's it. But when we've seen so many of these other weird things, and they're just trying to be sort of dismissed as nothing really, then it makes me think that there was life on Mars. There probably still is, but as I said, kind of like if we had a nuclear war, a complete worldwide nuclear war tomorrow, 50,000 years from now, there probably wouldn't be much left of our civilization. There would just be stuff that, somebody coming from another planet would see, look out the window of their craft and say, well, that kind of looks like a ruined city. And somebody else would say, no, that's just the way the rocks have weathered or whatever, because there wouldn't be much left of our society left, because we'd have blasted it into nothing. And so I think that's one of the problems as well, is that we're dealing with a world and a civilization that may have been at its peak at like 250,000 years ago. And if the world or if the civilization was destroyed in a war or due to some sort of natural issues, sort of meteorite strikes, that kind of thing, who knows? But when you're dealing with something that's, a civilization so long ago, and there may not be too much surface material left for us to analyze apart from these weird anomalies, I think the only way, if one day we can get to Mars with a significant, big enough team and actually sort of explore the lower levels of Mars, that I think really could be the one way we could get the answers. I would not be surprised if there were intelligent Martians and they realized they were spiraling down to an end, with their civilization. They may just have gone deep underground, and who's to say they're not still there?
Right. Eric, are you going to chime in on the Mars conversation?
I think you covered everything I had questions on. I'm good.
All right. He doesn't want to touch Mars.
Well, no, I had questions in regards to the photographs and NASA covering things up, but you guys already discussed it. So, yeah, you answered what I was going to ask.
Yeah. Well, if I actually get a report, Eric, of a Bigfoot on Mars, I'll let you know.
Wasn't there? Maybe you can answer this, Nick. This is just off the cuff humor, but wasn't there supposedly a picture of a Bigfoot sitting on a rock in Mars that was released a few years ago?
Yeah. Well, that was actually one where I won't say it was explained away. It wasn't, but the photograph itself, what the major national media actually knew, but they left it out of nearly all of the stories because it would have sort of got rid of the sensationalism, is that photograph of that, what looks like a statue or a figure sitting, sort of semi-sitting on a rock, is actually only about 4 to 5 inches tall. That picture was actually taken by one of the probes that was literally like just a few feet away from it, but with the perspective and everything else, it looked like a human-sized figure a long way away, but it was actually a really small thing close to the rover. And it was really only the scientific journals that covered the perspective angle. The regular newspapers and the internet, they didn't really touch it because it destroyed a good story.
So essentially, there's no Bigfoot on Mars.
What's that?
I said, so essentially, there really is no Bigfoot on Mars.
No, there isn't. No.
Yeah,
No,
then
as far as I know.
I'll pass on Mars then. You guys can talk about Mars.
Yeah, that. I mean, it does look like a little rock. Now, some researchers have suggested that it could have been like an ancient little carving, which I guess isn't out of the the possibility. I mean, all the little things we found at archaeological sites like Egypt and Rome, South America, Greece, sort of little carved statues have been found. I mean, you could make a case that that was something like that. I mean, like that, because it really does look like a little figure with a head and an arm, and so maybe that's what it was. But what it isn't is like a 6 to 7 foot tall carving. It's nothing like that.
So on Mysteries of the Deep, where can people get that book?
Well, the book's called Monsters of the Deep, and
I apologize. Monsters of the Deep.
That's right. Monsters of the Deep, yeah. And it's published by Visible Ink Press, and you can get it online at Amazon, and you can also get it off the shelves in Barnes and Noble. And if you want it online, you can get it. On Amazon, you can get it in paperback and Audible as well, and Kindle.
Do you do your own narration on your Audible books?
Oh no, that would be I wouldn't have the time or the the mind to do that. What they do. There are people whose full-time job is just sort of turning a regular book into an Audible book, and if you've got like a 300 page long book, I don't know how they do it. Just sort of reading a book, and not making mistakes. Now I'm sure they do now and again. But I mean, you have to be a really good, sort of voiceover type person, and have the sort of, the right tone at the right time, and make it sound that it isn't bland. It's got to sound exciting when there's an exciting part in the book. So, doing that job, I think, I'm sure a lot of effort and teaching goes into do that. So, but as I said, they have companies that do that, and I guess for them it just, it just comes to them normally. But no, I wouldn't have the time or the effort, or I just couldn't do it. I couldn't face doing that.
It would be nice, though, to hear your voice with your beautiful accent, telling the story.
You.
Yes.
Well, I guess it makes a change, but maybe I'll try it one day. But I just think it would be a really difficult thing. But as I said, because there's so many, companies that do that, I mean, they're sort of way ahead of anybody else doing it. They really are good at making it sound, the tone and the excitement and everything else at the right time. And, so it's not as easy as I think, a lot of people might think. You just sit there with a book in front of you and read it. It's not nowhere near as simple as that.
Right. And then the Martians, Evidence of Life on the Red Planet. When is that available to purchase?
That'll be out on October the 1st, and again, Barnes & Noble and Amazon. And that actually has the paperback, Kindle, it's got Audible, and it's also coming out in a CD box set as well, which is, again, like a readable book, but rather than doing it in Audible, it's actually on CDs, for people who remember CDs.
That's pretty cool. I don't know that I've ever heard of anybody doing that format before. Well,
you can find them. I think out of my books, I think 6 or 7. I think it's either 6 or 7, but they've been turned into CD box sets, and it's nice. You sort of you've got the box and a new folder and a new picture. They change the picture from the cover of the book. They give it a nice new different cover for the CD, and they sort of usually like a little description inside. It's almost like buying a CD and looking at the pictures of the band, that kind of thing. It's sort of
Yeah, that's what I thought was cool about it. It would
Yeah.
be, kind of like that. You get the extra bonus stuff in there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And now, with the climate of COVID, this might be a silly question, but do you have any events upcoming that you'd like to promote?
No. No, I mean, I have to say that I would say somewhere about this year so far, I'd probably say I've lost about 50% of all my work, because apart from the books, my other income and work is derived from conferences, lectures, and TV work. And this year, most conferences, they said, well, we'll think about it. We might put it on, and then, sorry, we've decided we're going to cancel it. Period. And that, that sort of was the trend throughout the year. They're thinking about it, but I mean, you can't blame conference organisers, because I mean, right now, I wouldn't go and speak at a conference right now. The conferences that weren't cancelled by the organisers, if I was speaking at them, I actually took myself out of it. And they totally understood. Nobody had any issues. They totally understood. But, there's just no way, at the height of something like this, that, I'm going to go into a room with 500 people.
Right.
And that's no disrespect to those people. I would expect them to react with the same with me. That, well, for all we know, Nick's got the virus, which I don't. But I mean, you could understand why somebody would say that. So I actually took myself out of all the conferences, lectures, and TV, because again, doing TV, you've got to make 2 or 3, 4 flights to get to this place. Then you're going to be filmed by people you don't even know. Then you got to go to the hotel, before you fly back the next day. That, when you put all those issues together, you are really putting yourself in a dicey position, really.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I absolutely can respect that decision 100%. Because you're doing the right thing.
Well, yes, and I don't want to be reckless and be like someone who might have it and then they pass it on to half the audience in the conference or whatever.
Exactly.
So what I've been doing, I've just been as careful as I can, and I sort of go out about once every 3 weeks to get food in and then bring it back, and then when I get close to the 3-week mark again, I get enough food for that period. So, I've been really, the apartment block where I live, I put a mask on when I go down to get the mail from the mailbox. I'm being as careful as you can,
Right.
But, I don't know. Hopefully, at some point we'll get an answer for it, but, I don't know.
For the foreseeable future, yeah.
Yeah, it's like untried territory, I suppose. In our civilization, there was the Spanish flu, just a bit more than 100 years ago. But beyond that, we've never really had anything like this. So I guess we just got to wait and see what happens, I suppose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Eric, any last words?
Other than it's always a pleasure to talk with you, Nick. And it was good seeing you. It was good seeing you in November of 2019. We attended at the same conference, the conference of the Weird and Unexplained in southwestern Pennsylvania. It was good seeing you there.
Yeah, it was a good one. I enjoyed that one, and I don't know if they're going to put any more on, are they, or not?
They were supposed to do it this year in June,
but
were.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the COVID kind of put an end to that, and then they were going to do a second one in November, but they sold that hotel where they had the conference at, and it's being turned into a like a Home Depot type of hardware store. So I don't think we'll.
The one where we did the conference.
Yeah, they sold the hotel, and they're tearing it down and making it into a hardware store. Believe it or not.
Oh well. That's strange.
Yeah, to say the least. But yeah, it was really good to see you, and I'm looking forward to your books, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot more in the future coming out. And always a pleasure talking to you, my friend.
Well, thanks a lot, Eric. You too, and thanks again, Marie, for having me on the show again.
Oh, thank you so much for being on again. It's always a pleasure. I love to pick your brain. You have so much knowledge. So thank you.
Well, thanks again, and then stay safe.
Yes, you too. Obviously, you're doing everything you can. I hope all of our listeners stay safe. And until the next episode, stay scared.